The United States, pursuing a policy of containment in Southeast Asia, began providing military aid and advisors to South Vietnam as early as 1955, but by 1964, it began to deploy large-scale combat troops to the region. The United States and its massive military far outstripped the capability and capacity of both the North Vietnamese military as well as the guerrilla insurgency force in the south, the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, colloquially called the Viet Cong. The United States Armed Forces had the absolute ability to conquer the North. What it lacked, however, was a political decision in the United States to take that step. The US not only wanted to avoid appearing as an international aggressor, but they also feared escalating the conflict and risking the involvement of Chinese or even Soviet troops. American involvement was not about the conquest of the North, but rather stabilizing and maintaining a pro-American government in power in Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam.
A sponsor that you can eat? What more could you desire? Boxu is a monthly snack box subscription service that delivers original assortments of premium Japanese snacks and tea pairings right to your door. Every month, you'll receive a box with a different theme. The snacks will always be different, so it becomes a new gourmet journey through Japan every month. This month's box, Prefecture Passion, will take you on a tasting tour of the various different prefectures of Japan. Our favorite has got to be the dried persimmon mochi, definitely a traditional treat. Boxu makes such a perfect and memorable gift for anyone in your life who appreciates Japanese snacks and culture, especially during a time when people aren't able to travel as easily as they would like. Actually, not only would you be gifting them Boxu, which is already awesome, but you would also be gifting them the chance to win free tickets to Japan, because Boxu is having a giveaway. They will be picking 5 lucky winners to win a free set of tickets, and anyone who's subscribed before December 31st is automatically entered. The link is in the description. Check out the terms and conditions and other methods of entry. Don't forget to use our code COLDWAR10 and the link in the description to get 10% off and save up to $47 on your own authentic Japanese subscription box from Boxu.
While North Vietnamese troops and communist irregulars operated all over South Vietnam, American ground units never crossed the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, at the 17th parallel into North Vietnamese territory. The US could not wage an offensive war, but rather needed to win via a defensive war. Air units could and did strike targets in the north, but ground action was off limits. Understanding that many of the troops and supplies fueling communist action in South Vietnam were coming from North Vietnam, but unable to put troops on the ground in the north, the United States relied on air power to try and stop, or at least reduce, the flow from north to south. They also hoped that the use of air operations against the north would demoralize the communists into stopping their support for the insurgency in the south. In March 1965, Operation Rolling Thunder was initiated. Rolling Thunder was conceived as an 8-week sustained aerial bombing campaign against communist targets. Initially, nothing north of the DMZ was to be targeted, but as Rolling Thunder blew past its 8-week run, targets in the north began to be included. Rolling Thunder, however, suffered from a lack of clear objectives and was hamstrung by not being able to strike Hanoi, Haiphong, or the buffer area on the Chinese border. The United States Air Force, who flew the bulk of missions for Rolling Thunder, was equipped with some of the most advanced weapons platforms in the world at the time. Notably, however, this equipment had largely been developed to fight a nuclear war in Europe, not a conventional war or an insurgency anywhere. Pilots had been trained in doctrines and tactics that did not match the task they had been assigned, and then they were armed with equipment that was not well suited for the task. The majority of Rolling Thunder missions were being flown from 4 US air bases located in Allied Thailand: Korat, Takli, Udon Thani, and Ubon. They would then refuel over Laos before flying to their targets. The ingress and egress routes used by strike planes during Operation Rolling Thunder became almost routine, making interception and ambush by the Vietnamese People's Air Force a much easier task. The kill ratio, or how many enemy planes were shot down compared to American planes, was an informal measure as to how well the US Air Force was performing, and for the US Air Force in the skies over Vietnam, it was almost 1-to-1. To explain this, we need to look at tactics and equipment. The United States Air Force was primarily equipped with the Republic F-105D Thunder Chief fighter bomber. The F-105 could carry up to 14,000 pounds of ordnance to target, more than twice as much as the F-100 Super Sabre in use by the South Vietnamese Air Force. The Thud, as it was known, had a mixed reputation by air crews, as the aircraft had been plagued by earlier life cycle problems, but this single-engine plane could deliver a payload 4 times as large as the Second World War B-17 Flying Fortress. For this reason, the Thud was the primary Air Force bomber used during Operation Rolling Thunder. By 1965, the F-105 was being joined in the Air Force by the now iconic McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II. The F-4 was powerful, handled well, and carried up to 8 air-to-air missiles, normally a mix of the Beyond Visual Range AIM-7 Sparrow and the short-range AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. While both missiles suffered maintenance issues in the tropical conditions of Southeast Asia, the rules of engagement issued by the USAF required that pilots visually identify enemy aircraft before entering combat, so the longer-range Sparrow missiles were largely redundant, forcing dogfighting to occur. As the F-4 was not armed with an internal gun, it had to rely on its less than reliable missiles. The VPAF, by contrast, was flying MiG-17 Fresco fighters, which were capable but not superior or even equal to their American counterparts. But in 1966, a game-changer was introduced to the battlefield when the VPAF received MiG-21 Fishbed fighters from the Soviet Union. Fast, agile, well-armed, and flown by experienced combat pilots, the MiG-21 had an instant impact in the skies over Vietnam when it first flew in October of 1966. It outclassed the F-105s in almost every category, and was a match for the F-4s, especially when being used to ambush the predictable American bombing sorties. The MiG-21 was, however, hampered by relatively low fuel loads, limiting its combat flight time. The list of potential American targets in North Vietnam was well understood by the North Vietnamese, who began to install intricate and well-developed anti-aircraft systems, including the Soviet-made S-75 Dvina Surface-to-Air Missile System, or SAM, known in the West as the SA-2 Guideline. In response to this, by October of 1966, the F-105Ds in Vietnam began to be equipped with the QRC-160 radar jammers, which all but ended the SAM threat to the F-105s, but those missile attacks then shifted against the F-4 Phantom escorts, who were forced to end their escort missions at the edge of SAM range, leaving the F-105 vulnerable to hit and run attacks by the new MiG-21s. In late 1966, Colonel Robin Olds, a Second World War double ace in the skies over Europe, was assigned command of the USAF 8th Tactical Fighter Wing based out of Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base. Olds was upset by the loss of 2 F-4s lost in the weeks before joining the fighter wing, as well as the downing of another F-4 to a MiG-21 the week he joined. He wanted to do something about it, and what he came up with was Operation Bolo. Bolo aimed to make the F-4 appear like the vulnerable F-105 on a radar screen and lure the VPAF MiG-21s into a drawn-out dogfight, which the MiGs did not have the flight time for. This masquerade would be done by installing the same QRC-160 radar jammers from the F-105s on the F-4s and flying the Phantoms in the same inflexible pattern used by the F-105s to maximize the effectiveness of the QRC-160. Bolo proposed a coordinated operation consisting of a West Force and an East Force. West Force would consist of 7 flights, each made up of 4 disguised F-4s from the 8th Tactical Air Wing flying from Ubon, simulating an F-105 strike force, while the East Force would be made up of another 7 flights of F-4s from the 366th Tactical Fighter Wing flying out from the airbase at Da Nang. While West Force would be the hammer, East Force's mission was to be the anvil, preventing the escape of any VPAF fighters to the north towards China. The flights from West Force were to be timed 5 minutes apart to keep any MiGs who came out to engage the force in the air and continuously flying to try and exceed their approximate 55 minutes of combat airtime. The gap in timing also allowed for each flight to move to a missile-free state where missiles could be used without the need for visual confirmation before firing. December 22, 1966 saw Operation Bolo approved by the United States Air Force with an attack date set for January 1, 1967. It was held over one extra day due to poor weather, but on the 2nd of January 1967, Operation Bolo was go. The 7 flights in West Force were named after American car companies, and they were, in order of attack, Olds, Ford, Rambler, Vespa, Plymouth, Lincoln, and Tempest. Colonel Olds led the first flight of F-4s, Olds Flight, of course, and used one of the regular F-105 ingress routes to the target at Phu Quien Air Base north of Hanoi, arriving at approximately 1500 hours, but due to cloud cover, could not see if the North Vietnamese fighters were taking the bait. Olds loitered over the target, not aware that the Vietnamese ground controllers had delayed deploying their MiG-21s due to the cloud cover. Just as Colonel Olds was cancelling the missile-free status due to the arrival of Ford Flight, the first MiGs came through the cloud cover. Olds Flight moved to engage, dropping their fuel tanks and going to afterburner. Olds 2, piloted by First Lieutenant Ralph Wetterhen, locked onto a MiG-21 and scored the first kill of the engagement with an AIM-7 Sparrow. While this was going on, Colonel Olds in Olds 1 fired 3 missiles, none of which were successful. He then followed this with a vector roll, a vertical turn which placed his F-4 behind another MiG-21, against whom he fired 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders, one of which took the wing of the MiG off, sending the aircraft into a spiral below the clouds. Meanwhile, Olds 4, commanded by Captain Walter Radiker III, had targeted another MiG and, despite not getting missile lock, launched anyway. Despite this, the AIM-9 guided to target and hit the MiG, securing a 3rd kill for the Americans. At this point, Olds Flight was forced to exit the area and return to base due to fuel limits. However, Ford Flight had entered the area just as Olds Flight was starting the engagement. The fight over Phu Quien Air Base was turning into a dogfight, and as Olds Flight departed, Ford Flight engaged. In a series of maneuvers against the agile MiG-21s, Ford 1 launched but missed as the MiG pilot evaded, only to put himself directly in the line of Ford 2's Captain Everett Raspberry, who struck the MiG with a Sidewinder. Ford Flight then exited the combat area as Rambler Flight entered. Captain John Stone, the leader of Rambler Flight, quickly spotted 2 MiGs coming up through the clouds and dove towards them, firing a missile. That missile failed to ignite, but his second salvo was successful and a 5th MiG was put out of action. A 6th MiG, behind the one which Rambler 1 had just taken out, was also hit by Rambler 4, commanded by Major Philip Combes. Almost simultaneously, Rambler 2, commanded by First Lieutenant Lawrence Glynn Jr., fired a Sparrow into a MiG that came across in front of him. In 12 minutes of combat, and with a kill ratio of 7-0, and the North Vietnamese SAM systems starting to light up, Rambler Flight exited the engagement area to return to base. The remaining 4 flights, as they entered at their 5-minute intervals, quickly found the entire engagement over and the SAM activity too much, and all left for base. Operation Bolo was an outstanding success for the United States Air Force. They claimed 7 downed top-of-the-line enemy fighters for 0 losses on their side. The VPFA officially stated only 5 losses, but the discrepancy is possibly from the aircraft that were hit, but still made it back to base, or were salvaged and eventually repaired. None of the 5 Vietnamese pilots officially shot down were killed, and all ejected safely. Despite this, the VPFA still considered January 2, 1967 to be one of the worst days of the war. Of the 16 new fighters they had brought into service, 5, or 7, had been shot down. Operation Bolo, plus 2 other similar masquerade operations, which were flown in the following days, and resulted in 2 more downed MiGs, forced the VPFA to ground their aircraft for several months while new tactics and training were developed. Operation Bolo, a tactical victory for the United States, offered a respite to the beleaguered F-105 pilots, but exemplified the American experience in Southeast Asia. With planning and the right equipment, they could win every battle they fought, but could never win a war that didn't have a clear, achievable goal. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and to make sure you don't miss future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have crushed the bell button. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. We're also active on Facebook and Instagram at The Cold War TV. If you enjoy our work, consider supporting us via Patreon at www.patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. If you can't contribute financially, please share this with your friends, family, and anybody else you think might enjoy our work. Every bit helps us grow. This is the Cold War channel, and don't forget, the trouble with the Cold War is that it doesn't take too long before it becomes heated.